Hi everybody, David here with VAAI Render. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the new 2023 Twinmotion preview number 2. Now this just came out over here in the US today, and so we're going to take a look at that and we're going to work through a project. This is the second of what I'm referring to as the Build This With Me projects, where I'll take you through step by step the creation of an architectural visualization render from start to finish. And because we're going to be looking at the new version of Twinmotion, I'll talk about some of the differences and changes as well. All right, let's go ahead and begin, and we'll start by jumping over to SketchUp to take a look at the model that we're going to use for the scene. Along the way, I'll give you some tips and tricks and some advice on setting up everything from your materials to your actual camera and a little bit of post-production in Photoshop. All right, let's go ahead and get started, and I'll see you in SketchUp. Okay, everybody, so here we are in SketchUp, and you can see we've got a pretty traditional A-frame style build here. Now, please note, I did not build this SketchUp model. I really just want to get into the Twinmotion part of this course. So I kind of just grabbed one from the warehouse, and it's a really beautiful model, whoever made this. I did add just a few little elements. We have a bed on the inside, and I've just added some generic kitchen equipment as well. All of these objects came from the warehouse. All in all, it's a pretty nicely built model. It's actually really nicely built, I think, and will kind of work very well for the finished look and feel. Overall, what we're going for in this image is something akin to an isolated cabin that's actually situated not necessarily on water, but perhaps out on a jetty or perhaps attached to the mainland via a little causeway. So we want the shot to feel a little bit like this small pocket of warmth in a very sort of cold environment, or at least something a little bit more rocky and sort of visually appealing. So let's go ahead and we'll send this over to Twinmotion. We can actually just delete our scale measurement here. We don't need that anymore. And the only other change I've made is to lift the model up just a little bit off of the green axis. You want to get it just slightly above the ground plane to give ourselves some breathing room. Now, we may end up trying a variety of different techniques to put our ground layer and the water layer in, but for now it's good enough to just have the build lifted right up. All right, let's go ahead and turn on our DataSmith. So you can get the DataSmith, I believe, from, I think, Epic. You can access it, I think, through really just by going to the Epic's website or just searching for Twinmotion and you'll find the DataSmith. We've gone ahead and installed it here, and you'll notice we've got a few different options, but the one that we're going to click on is Export to DataSmith File. This will become very important, and I'm going to go and place that on my just Twinmotion A-frame folder. And that's pretty much it for this point. Let's fire up Twinmotion. So here you can see this is the Epic installer, or the really kind of like the Epic store, the marketplace library, and the Twinmotion. So if you've used Unreal at all, then you're quite familiar with this. And you'll notice that here we have the Twinmotion launcher. And if we use the drop-down menu, you can see we've got different versions going on here, and you can go back quite a ways. But this is the one that we're going to utilize now, the more recent, newish Twinmotion. This has replaced preview number 1, which was kind of actually pretty recent, so I'm kind of impressed with that. And preview 2 has, like I said, just come out today. So let's go and launch it. All right, the first thing you'll notice is the splash screen. These are really, really nice. They're effectively pre-made scenes that you can utilize in your renders going forward. If any of you have used KeyShot in the past, you'll be very familiar with this sort of basic lighting, studio lighting setup. I haven't used the other ones. I've just so far just used the default. I did have a poke around at the basic lighting setup before, which is a really, really nice studio lighting setup, which will work if you're into product visualization, which is something that Twinmotion has been pivoting to a lot more recently. A lot of their presentation material seems to utilize really product look and feel, really just, 3D versions of products and product development, which is kind of really cool. If you've ever used Keyshot in the past, then you kind of know what we're talking about. However, we're pretty happy though with just using the normal scene. So I'm going to hit new scene. And this is what we get. All right, looks pretty interesting. This is slightly different than the old flat sort of plane that you would have gotten, which had that urban skyline. It's slightly different. In terms of responsiveness, the keypad 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 will still work to speed up or slow down your camera. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard. 3 and 4 will give us a nice speed for our initial shots. But now, let's go ahead and in the next section, we're going to import our SketchUp model. All right, everyone. So I do want to just talk about the interface a little bit. If any of you had previously watched the video that I recorded on Twinmotion users moving to D5 and what you can expect, you might recall that one of my biggest issues with Twinmotion was the interface. Now, the interface has changed quite a lot in the last number of years, but it still relied more recently on nested menus. So in other words, menus that were hidden with inside other menus, which were further inside other menus. Now, it worked pretty well if you were used to it, but could also be somewhat nightmarish if you were trying to learn Twinmotion for the first time and just not knowing, for example, where to go ahead and maybe load up your height map. You had to go within a menu, within a menu, within a menu. So the interface now has been massively overhauled. It does keep the same sort of dark gray interface color scheme, which is really, really nice and seems to become the general trend. Really over the last 10 years, it seems like most programs are switching to a dark mode version, and I really do like it. Okay, over here on the left, we have all the standard content that you would have gotten before. So we have our materials. We've got lots of different materials in here that we can mess around with. And these are the standard materials that come with Twinmotion. We've also got vegetation, trees, flowers, things like that. They have increased, I believe, some newer models recently. They're still, I'm going to say they're okay-ish. Please don't be mad at me, Twinmotion fans. They're okay-ish is the best way I can describe that. I wouldn't exclusively rely on them, but I think they'll work for a lot of standard projects. It's not hundreds of trees, though. You're not looking at 600 different types. Even though they have increased the amount, they're still somewhat lagging behind some other libraries. We also have objects, including things like home, living room, chairs, a lot of decorative elements, and they really have recently added a lot of newer models, really over the last 2 years. It seems like they've taken that to heart, criticism and feedback, and really the assets have improved quite a bit. I don't think they're as good as the D5 asset library just yet, but they are definitely improving, and they are ahead of a lot of what you get in Lumion. All right, we also have access to important things here. The Megascans library, which we're going to utilize quite a lot, and I think almost everyone involved in visualization has probably used this at least in the last year, maybe even the last 2 years, and we'll use this a lot to actually build our scene. The Sketchfab library, it's very unlikely we'll actually utilize this. I mentioned this in my previous video. I don't really know what architectural visualization people would actually really use this. There's too much content there, not enough quality controls, and it might be just really difficult to find exactly what you want. And since we're going for an outdoor shot, it's really unlikely that we're going to need to access a lot of this content. In saying that, if we find something cool during the process of making this tutorial, then we'll probably go ahead and put it in there. All right, over here on the right, then you'll see we still have the actual scene layout. We have everything from our starting ground, starting landscape, and we have this, what seems to be the default starting objects in your scene now. I'm not sure yet if this is customizable, if you can edit this and then save it. But for now, I think this is pretty good. We can go ahead and just select all of these. We can either hit delete and get rid of it, or we can do Control-Z and manually delete the parts that we don't actually want. Also, I may be mistaken on this, but I do think that this starting interface is looking a little bit more Unreal Engine-like, but I'm not hugely familiar with the Unreal Engine at the moment, but I do think that's sort of the direction. There seems to be an increased push for synergy between the two, so that if you're familiar with one ecosystem, you might have an easier time switching to the other. And I will actually talk about that in another video about some of the changes under the hood here as well. All right, I'm gonna move the little icon up here. And down here on the bottom, we have some of the tabs that you're gonna spend a lot of time on, including the import, the actual materials. Populate is going to be if you're going to put trees, really if you want to use either paths or if you want to use brushes to paste in your trees and landscape. Finally, we have media, which is where we're going to store our camera shots. And if we do a little video, this is probably where we'll start setting that up. And lastly, our export tab. Okay, in the next section, let's go ahead and bring in our actual model. And as we work through this, we'll continue to dive a little bit more into each of these tabs and take just a little bit more time to look at the settings. All right, let's go ahead and bring in our model. All right, everyone. Just two more things that I want to mention before we use the DataSmith to bring in our SketchUp model. And the first is library. You can actually turn that on and off. So it's just good to know that you have this available right here. The other one that I like to have on is the stats. Now, previous users of Twinmotion will notice that this seems to have moved from the right-hand side, where it was under the scene graph, and has moved to the bottom left corner, which is actually probably a better place for it since it did take up quite a bit of space on the right. And so we've got some empty space over here on the left. Now, to get our SketchUp scene in, we are going to go to Import, which will be right down here in the bottom. And you'll see, click here to import file or create a DataSmith direct link. I'm going to click here. And the direct link setting source is already set to the SketchUp A-frame model. In terms of import options, I'm going to leave collapse by material on. That way, you know, for example, in SketchUp, if something has a wooden material on it, Twinmotion should recognize that all as one object. I'm going to keep full precision UVs on. Not hugely sure that this will make a big difference since I don't think that SketchUp generates UVs automatically, but everything else looks pretty good. Let's import it. You may be wondering why nothing has happened. Curiously, sometimes in the DataSmith, you do want to actually first go over here. Yeah, make sure that's good. And we can also go and manage connections here. And you can see A-frame, Twinmotion, it's all good. So what we'll do is hit the direct link auto sync. And I'm going to then manually just click in here to force this to update. Go back to Twinmotion. There we go. And here is our model. I'm going to hit Control P on my keyboard, and this will bring up the Settings, Quality, and Appearance tabs. Now, I'm going to concentrate on the quality right now. You'll notice that overall, the viewport isn't set to the best. It's because I have everything set to low. I'm going to put that to high, and I'm going to leave all of these settings on as they currently are. The viewport resolution scaling and the quality of the path tracer, I'm going to leave those on for now. Click OK. All right, and you can see now we've gotten our shadows back. That looks really, really nice so far. It's a little bit bouncy, but that could also be just because I'm recording as well. So I think that'll work just fine. What works? You can see we've got a really good selection of different wood materials that we can utilize. But because this is going to be an exterior shot, let's just grab this and drag it straight out. All right, if we look on the right now, you will see that we have details have appeared for this material. We can add grunge, and you can kind of see the effect this is going to have. And the grunge is really just going to be procedural noise that will help break up a texture. We can also adjust the color separately or independent of the material. I'm going to make that just a little bit lighter. And I think all in all, that looks pretty good. Some of these new settings I'm looking forward to experimenting with. Haven't really adjusted saturation or lift or gain, so I'm kind of curious how these will actually work. But for our function right now, just interior wood flooring, this looks pretty good. We can also adjust the UV, how this is actually applied. And you can see we've options to stretch on the X or Y. So if we needed to distort our texture to get it to fit our object a little bit better, we can also use offset X and offset Y, which will kind of move the texture to the left or to the right, or up or down. I'll turn that off. All right, the roughness slider will determine effectively the reflectivity is the best way to put it. Every material in real life is to some degree varying levels of roughness. In other words, how much light actually gets reflected off of it. In addition, we have the metallic slider down here. Because most materials are either metal or they're not, we can leave this at 0. Now, for the exterior wood material, especially on the walking area where you would get a lot of people walking and it's exposed to the elements, I want a wood material that's a little bit more worn. For this, I've gone to the Quixel bridge. Now, again, if you're not aware, brief overview, Quixel started life as a procedural texture generator that was really an add-on for Photoshop back when a lot of really textured assets for video games were really made in Photoshop, sort of a little bit before Substance Painter and Quixel Mixer had become sort of commonplace. Now, Quixel has long since been acquired by Epic and is a part of the Epic ecosystem, so Unreal Engine, Twinmotion, and the bridge itself. I'm going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but we are going to go over here to the left to surfaces. And I'm going to look for, you can see we've got a lot of different surfaces here, a lot of different options to choose from. I'm going to click on wood, and I am going to click then on plank. Now I can try plank, or I can also try log, but really, like, I'm not doing a log cabin. I'm not actually a big fan of that look, so I think we'll stick with plank. Okay. So you can see we've got a fantastic arrangement here of different wood materials that we can download. I'm going to look for something that's suitably worn for this shot. Yeah, let's try these guys. Now, you may also be familiar with the idea that you can download and export these materials. That is definitely one way you can do that, and you can manually extract the texture maps and then load them up into Twinmotion, but there is a faster way to do this. Now, I'll go through these steps a little bit more when we get to the landscape, but if you go up to the little dots right here, you can see we've got Copy Asset ID. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to bounce back to Twinmotion here, and I am here in the Materials tab, but anywhere in the library will work. Just click on the search bar and do a Control-V to paste. You do not have to be in the Megascans tab for this, and hit enter. And there we go. I can go ahead and just download this now, and I can drag this straight onto the surface, and there we go. It's a really, really fast, efficient way to do this. And it saves you time having to go all the way back into the actual Megascans, surfaces, wood, log, and looking through all of it like that. I just prefer to work on a separate tab. I just think the images are just a little bit bigger and easier to work with. Okay. I can use the eyedropper tool up here, the material picker, and I'm going to click on this surface. And now I am going to make a few little tweaks to this. I am going to increase the grunge quite a bit. I just want to add a little bit of wear and tear here. And we also do need to adjust the scale. I think right now this wood material is maybe just a little bit too small. You will notice that it does seem to be a very unbroken pattern, and it is tiling quite a bit. That's something we will kind of address. We'll try and break this up by adding some furniture and some decorative elements. And that will hopefully help break up that. All right, so there is our nice wood material on top. Pretty happy with the overall look of this, liking how rough it is. And I think all of this looks pretty nice. One thing to note with Twinmotion, and I just want to mention this because just as I was about to record this, I ran into it, is the two things really. The preview model, the preview version that we're using, 2023 Preview 2, a lot of the preview versions are unstable. And I mean that in the best possible way. They are preview versions. And one way you can kind of run into issues is not saving. So I think now is probably a good time to go ahead and do a quick Control S. And if we do a Control P here and look at our settings, we do have options under save for autosave. Mine is currently set to 15 minutes. Depending on the complexity of your scene and depending on what you're working with, you know, it could probably be good to maybe put this down a little bit. So I'm going to put this down to about every 7 minutes. As the releases get more sort of concurrent and up to date and more hopefully stable, you could probably put this back to the 15-minute tabs. But since we're working on a preview model, I am going to go ahead and just put that to 7. Click OK. The other thing to notice is navigation. We can use the WASD keys to move around and the Q and E keys to move up and down. But one reason that I mentioned this is I have a tendency to get stuck in the walk mode. So if we go up here to the little eye, you can see we've got options for the sun, time of day, camera, things like that. But I'm going to click on this, pedestrian mode and drone mode. For some reason, and I haven't figured this out exactly yet, you will often bounce into pedestrian mode, and when you do that, the the Q and E keys no longer work, and that will stop you from lifting the camera up and down. I'm going to click on that, and if this does happen to you, just do this, put it back to drone mode, and now the Q and E keys will work just fine. All right, so now that we've got the material set up, we can just have a quick peruse and look at that. I've gone ahead and just put some dark wood as the underbase under our actual build. On basically the roof area, we've put shingles. They're effectively like laminate tiles that would be piled up. Now this section right here is not completely accurate. You can kind of see a little bit of a problem there. If this was, you know, for production, I probably wouldn't leave this. I would try and build the roof as correctly as possible. But considering our camera may be all the way back here, I think we can probably get away with it. For the areas around the door, I've simply just used a white plaster with a grunge applied. Now, for the sections on the inside, for something like this, which again, the camera is going to be pretty far away, just hit T on the keyboard, select it. And what we can do is just go turn off these, and I'm just looking for the roughness and just drag that back a little bit. Give the impression that it's sort of a plastic surface. We can also go materials, metal, and really anywhere where we've got this kind of shiny metal, let's just add some chrome, and that will work pretty nicely. A lot of the objects in here really shouldn't be that visible, so we can just apply some pretty quick default standard materials to them. We shouldn't have to spend too much time fixing these up because, you know, realistically, they're not going to be that visible. All right, so all in all, I think that looks pretty good. Stuff like this, I'll probably just get rid of as we go forward. There's no point in keeping like really what is effectively just stuff that's going to drag down your scene. So that'll work for the inside. I do plan on leaving the bed. The bed model itself is pretty good by all accounts, and so we'll leave that as is. And we'll try and put up some lights maybe on the inside just to highlight the bed. Okay, let us begin to move on, and we're going to introduce some terrain models that we'll get from the Megascans library. All right, I'll see you in the next section. Moving on from the materials, it's time to start adding some context. I'm going to go to the library, go to Megascans, and I can try pasting in Control V. And there we go. This is a gigantic tundra terrain, and I'm just going to bounce over to the bridge here really quickly. You can see I'm in the collections, and this is actually the tundra collection. And this is the environment that we're going to build our kind of around our model. To start with, we're going to mess around with these two here, the gigantic tundra terrain, and we're going to approach this from a working big to small. So we're going to get the largest areas in first, and then we'll add some supplementary kind of areas of rock and stone, and then we'll add sort of our, what I would consider like secondary and tertiary details. So trees would be considered secondary, and then the tertiary will be the smaller details. So effectively the plants and birds and rocks and things kind of approach, just really the small little things that help sell the story. And click download. And this may take a while, depends a little bit on the speed of your connection. And I am going to place it right here. Okay, so if I pull the camera back, you can see this is really, really nice. It is quite large, which is exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to select that and just move it out of the way. And that way we'll be able to see where our house build is, which is somewhere over there. Now you'll notice I'm running into a little bit of a problem here. I do still have the original ground plane. So, you know, we can keep that for now, but we can always just move it out of the way or move it down. And I'm going to move it down. Okay. So the tundra build, the large scale land, I'm going to look for an area maybe a little bit more watery. And we can see, can we position really this to just sort of match up to our house. Okay. Select this. I'm going to move this around a little bit. Remember, I do want the house to be sort of out a little bit. I want it to feel like the house is actually out on the water, not just necessarily a part of it, but really positioned quite far out into the water. All right. Just something that you may find useful to know. The embedded Megascans materials are, to the best of my knowledge, limited to 2K texture maps. And you can see that right here. This is a tree stump that I downloaded directly from within Twinmotion. This is the exact same tree stump, but downloaded from the bridge and loaded into Twinmotion. Now, in many ways, when all the maps are put on, it's kind of hard to tell. However, just note that this one on the right has an 8K diffuse texture map. And the one on the left, obviously, is limited to that 2K. And you can kind of see it when we zoom in. You do get that blurriness going on. And if we zoom in on the 8K one, yeah, you can kind of see just the level of fidelity is still kind of sharper. Now, why does this matter? Well, we downloaded an environment directly from within Twinmotion, which meant it was capped at 2K. So what we ended up doing is manually downloading this texture map from the bridge and loading in the 8K. So you can see it's the same thing. The only thing that's going to be a little bit different is the texture map here. So I've got 4K in there right now, and I'm going to click on the texture details, click open, go to 8K, and let that load up. And you can see a little pop there that tells you it worked. And now when we hover over it, we have an 8K environment map. Now, not going to have a huge amount of impact on performance. I would be happy with an 8K map for a big area like that. For something close to the camera, you really just got to use good judgment, I think, and try not to have a huge amount of anything above 2K in your scene, as it will slow things down quite a bit. All right, hopefully that helps you. Let's move on. So you can see we've gone and added quite a bit more of these tundra rocky ground objects. And I think collectively they all work really well together. And you can see if we go and put our camera just back here to where I think we're going to position it, all in all, the ground looks pretty good. It's not super high resolution, but I have changed the resolution of this one right here to be 4K instead of the standard 2K that comes when you download from within Twinmotion. So putting our camera, sorry about the bounciness there, putting our camera back in kind of a position that we like, I think that looks pretty good. Okay. Everything is nicely lined up. This might be a good idea to go and save a camera shot. Down here on the bottom, we've got Import, Materials, You can see all the materials that we've used in the scene, and some of which that we're not using anything anymore. The ones that have a tick mark are currently being used. The other ones, like this chestnut, you can go and delete. That will kind of speed up your performance a little bit too. But let's go over to Media and click here to add an image. Now, I'm not going to do anything to this just yet. It's good enough just to know that I have this shot saved. Now, the next thing we're going to do is experiment with water. If you remember, there's our saving every 7 minutes, just popped up there. If you remember, we move the ground plane out of the way. So we're going to experiment a little bit to see what looks best when it comes to adding water to your scene, and we'll look at the path tracer settings as well. Here is our ground plane, the starting ground. I can toggle it on and off over on the scene tab on the right. And you will notice it is sitting quite a bit above the rest of the soil that we brought in. So we can bring this down. You want a nice little transition, nice blend as best you can. But I don't want it to be overpowering. Okay, looks good. And what I'm using is, I think right now we're just using the river water. And when I do that, you can see the options over here change to the river. And so we can adjust the water depth, and we can also adjust the turbidity. In my case though, I want to take down the wave intensity. I don't want it to look like it's moving too fast. And you can see we've got quite a lot of control here. Let's put this back to... Let's see how that looks. Yeah, I think so. Looks pretty nice. Now, I haven't had a chance to experiment with the caustic size and caustic intensity sliders yet. I'm not really sure what they're going to do. Might leave that for another day. But let's hit R on the keyboard to turn on the path tracer. Yeah, not looking too bad at all. May end up adjusting the water a little bit. I'll turn that off and just see. I want to look really close on the river's edge. Bearing in mind, we haven't adjusted the sun or the environment or anything else, just looking at the water settings. Now, if I put the path tracer to medium, see if we get a better result. Okay. Yeah, it's looking a little bit flat. We may tweak that a little bit, but ultimately, I'm not too, pretty happy with that actually, not too unhappy. One thing that is bothering me is this in the background. And that's the starting landscape. And so what I'm going to do is just turn that off. If we go back to our stored camera, you can see we're going to just kind of turn this off. And I am then going to just refresh here. So refresh, update the image to match the current status. Yes, I do not want that sort of starting landscape in the background. I'll populate some of that with trees, but I don't want, kind of whatever this is, just kind of floating there. All right, it's time to add some sort of secondary details to this. Right now, looking at our scene, we've got a nice bumpy area over here on the left. I think that looks pretty nice all in all. I'll turn back on that starting ground, go back to our stored camera, and I do want to refresh that. I want to make sure that the starting ground is always there. If we lift the camera up just a little dash, you can see a nice transition here from the water. It's not perfect, and there's going to be some limitations with the path tracer when it comes to grass in general. This seems to be a known issue going back a little bit. But over here on the right, I do want to break up some of this area. It's just a little bit kind of too, a little bit too clean. Okay, so let's place one of these rocks. We've gone to the library, Vegetation, and we're just going to use some standard rocks here. These aren't like, Quixel Megascan rocks or anything like that. These are just standard little ones. Go up to the top here, and you can see I can hit, on my keyboard, I have the options for 7, 8, and 9, and 9 is going to scale. So go ahead and click that, and just bring this down just a little bit. Hit 8 again to get back to my move tool. And I'm just going to crash these in here. You just want to look like there's a sort of naturalistic fall off. Doesn't have to be too perfect. Just, you wouldn't get kind of a very smooth transition here. So just something like that will work. And again, anywhere where you get really these smooth areas, nature generally abhors a vacuum. And so we want to try and kind of you know, break up some of those areas that are just a little bit too smooth. We can go ahead and place one of these larger rocks, but I don't know that they look as good. Okay, we can also go back to our Megascans, search for Tundra, Tundra, and let's see what we've got here. Let's grab one of these little Tundra boulders and just place that in again. Hit 9 on the keyboard and scale it down. Okay. I'm gonna look for maybe just a hero rock if I can get one. Something kind of a little bit larger. Let's see, you look good. Hit download. Okay, and not entirely sure why my downloads have stopped. Probably a good signal to go ahead and turn off Twinmotion and turn it back on again. When in doubt, let's do that. Control S to save, and we'll restart. All right, everybody, if you've made it to this point, right about the halfway mark right about now. So I've gone ahead and made just a few little alterations. And this is something that you're just going to have to kind of make up as you go along. I've added a few rocks over here just to break up the line where the water actually meets really just the edge of the ground. You want to try and avoid a really obvious transition. So we've just put a few rocks there to break it up. Now these are just duplicates of the ones that we've already downloaded and just rotated a little bit so you avoid any sense of sameness. Now, we've also gone ahead and just sprinkled a few weeds. So these are just going to be under vegetation and grass and flowers. And we've got everything from little heather down here, daisies, and the tall grasses. And all of these, you can just manually place them in your scene. You can brush them in, and we might talk about that at a later date. But for our purposes here, just adding little sprigs of greenery to give the impression of life in your shot. No matter how desolate the area, you're always going to get some level of sort of greenery or sparsity that kind of grows. Now, I've also added one or two trees. I do want to avoid really having a huge amount of trees in this shot. I do want to go for something that, as we said, gives off a little bit more of a sort of lonely feel or isolated. So you've got this like pocket of warmth coming from the home in a generally sort of Spartan, very rocky landscape environment instead. So I've added one or two, and if we go now and I'm going to turn on the path tracer, hit the R key on your keyboard. By the way, there are known limitations from the older versions of Twinmotion regarding how water behaves, more specifically the lack of depth. I don't see that that's actually changed in this one. There is a workaround you can do where you apply basically a shiny, flat, mirror-like material, and then you add a normal map with ripples and bumps in it to give the impression basically of depth and variation on the surface. I'm pretty okay with the result that I'm getting so far. It might not be completely photorealistic per se, but I think artistically it's not bad at all. All right, with that being said, let's add our last bit of decoration, the lights inside, and I think we'll be good to render after we change the environment a bit. All right. All right, everyone, I've gone back to just the regular library, and you can see in the top left, and under just where we've been kind of previously before, we do have objects. So I'm going to click on this, and you'll notice we get some more options. Obviously, the city objects are not really going to be pertinent to us right now, but if we go to home, you can see we get quite a lot of stuff. I am going to place just a couple of these objects in here. So for example, the living room, let's go into our model. Again, we shouldn't really be seeing a huge amount in the model. I don't necessarily want that, but we can add, like at minimum, just add some sort of maybe sofa or chair. All right, I'm gonna place that. You can always just hit right click on the mouse to deselect, and I'm just gonna spin this little fella here. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect. Theoretically, it won't really be that visible anyway. We just want to make sure there's something in here to give some semblance of life. We'll also add maybe just a small little table if we can find something suitable. Okay, let's pick this little guy. And I'm going to place this right here just by the door, just so it looks like there's something in the shot. Maybe a little seating area just to the left of the kitchen. These high tables could look pretty nice as well. We'll download them. I'm not spending a huge amount of time set decorating this on the inside. In fact, I'm not really too pushed about how the inside looks at all. I just want to have something there. Again, hit 9 on the keyboard to scale this guy down. Just something that a person could sit at. And then I'm going to hit 8 on the keyboard. Hold down Shift to drag out a duplicate. It'll ask you if you do that if you want to make a copy or an instance. I'm just going to do instance, so any changes I make to one will apply to the other two. All right, that's good enough. We really don't want a huge amount of stuff in here. All right, plants. Always nice to just add like a plant in the scene. So we'll grab this little orchard. Looks very nice. Place it there. Just a little bit of decoration. Place this here. Again, none of this should really be too visible from the outside. Just on the off chance that our light picks up something. Now, going outside of the living room, electronics and appliances, if we were going to spend more time in here, I'd do more, but all we need is something like that. You can already see the bed upstairs. So let's pop out of here, go to home, and we'll go to backyard, and we'll add some stuff here. By the way, I haven't looked at these before, so we're gonna make this up as we go along. Just something that fits with the shot. Oh yeah, that looks really nice. Okay. Don't know if I want to add too much sort of decorative stuff out here. Wood pile definitely always looks good. I'm gonna pile that up on the left there. Yeah, and I'll leave the other side empty. I do this little garden storage, kind of looks nice. Really just anything that you can think to add to the shot that will sort of help a little bit. We'll bring that in and just place that there. So I was able to grab 2 benches. These are from Lucas Design Associates. You can get them on the warehouse. And it's kind of nice. I can really just go in here, hit T on the keyboard, select this part, which is going to be the metal part, and I'm not going to really assign a material. I'm just going to adjust some of the details here, including the roughness and whether something is metallic or not. Same with the wood. It's easy enough to just select that, and you know, I can probably tweak this, but that's really okay. Maybe just drop the roughness down a little bit. Should still work. Next thing I'm going to do is just add some planters over here. And I think that will be sort of it. So for those, I'm going to go back to, not the home, back to the library, back to the Megascans. And I'm going to look for 3D objects. And what we can do is look for props maybe and see what we have. I'd like to add at least maybe just something kind of a little bit more rustic that will help. Try and give the impression that, you know, this is still kind of a lived-in space. And yeah, let's do these bourbon barrels. It's a small thing, but I think they'll look pretty cool. Yeah. Okay. Very much like the look of that. That's really, really cool. Okay, and then other than that, is there anything we can maybe add? Let's grab the rusty metal tub. And we might put some greenery in that. The library, vegetation, grass, let's do bushes, and let's see if we can't maybe decorate it just a little bit, just to try and sort of give the impression that, you know, there's a little bit of life here. And I'm gonna put, let's see how this guy looks. It is coming in fine. Might lift it up. You do get kind of this sort of issue where greenery might come through the pot a little bit. You want to try and avoid that, definitely. But this will work nicely. We just want something in there, just so it doesn't feel too empty. And put another one there. All right. we run into any issues there, we can always Photoshop it out. All right, last thing we're going to do here is add a few little lights. And I'm going to go up here to lights, and let's see what we can do in terms of adding something to the inside. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this. I just want to make it look like there's light on the inside. Put one light here. Apologies for the dog barking in the background. There we go. Now, I don't know how strong these lights are going to be. By default, most lights in most 3D programs tend to be a lot stronger than they need to be. Let's just hit OR on the keyboard. Let's put the path tracer down to low again. I'll put my camera right back here. All that matters is how it looks from the camera. A little bit slower than I want to drop the bounces just a little bit. Okay, and what we're going to do to see this in a different lighting environment is to actually change the ambience, and that's going to be right up here. Otherwise, we won't be able to tell how well that light is working. So in the next video, let's change the ambience. Okay, everyone, we're going to change the ambience, but before I do that, I want to mention something about the sort of environment lighting in Twinmotion. Strictly speaking, there's three ways to kind of light your scene. What they call the dynamic sky. So if we go up here and click on the sun, and you can adjust really just the standard. This is very similar to D5's Geo and Sky system. You can just kind of really rotate the time of day. And if I move this over to the left here, you can see then under the ambience tab here, we also have options that will allow us to adjust the weather and the seasons as well. This is sort of like procedurally generated kind of fake snow and fake rain and things like that. I don't spend a huge amount of time on this, but just be mindful. Now, the other thing that's sort of separate to this is the HDR environments, and these are on your left right here. Now, loosely speaking, they used to be like a dynamic, it was kind of a sky dome. That seems to be gone, so now we have skies. And then if we back out of that, we've got indoor and outdoor. These are HDRI backgrounds that you could use for particular shots. And then you've got the studio lighting here. I believe it's a simplified sort of lighting system, but for our purposes, just to see how the light is actually working, we can go up here, go to the sun, and just drop the time of day. All right, I'm gonna bring that right down. Okay, so you can kind of see here, that looks really, really nice. Hit OR on the keyboard. And obviously the light that we placed in is really, really, really strong. So just hit OR again really quickly to undo that. And we're gonna zoom in here. We can also go to the right, scroll down to the scene tab, or we can just click on this and open up lights. And you can see I've got my two IES lights that we placed in the scene. The attenuation is going to determine the fall off. And you can see that when you do select them, the options over here on the right change. This is really, really nice because really everything is at your fingertips. And so I don't have to go into menus. I'm going to put that a little bit down. All right. And the intensity itself, again, don't go off the viewport here. Let's just turn on the path tracer and see how it looks. I want it to just look like there's a soft glow in there, just a little bit. I don't want it to look overwhelmingly like bright. We can also adjust the temperature here on the right to make it just appear a little warmer. I think that's going to be probably a little too bright. What I think I'll do is select this light and move him back. There we go. All right, you can see we're getting a bit of a spotlight effect going on in there. That's not too bad. Let's go back to our library and we'll go back to lights. And I am just going to put a soft area light in here. I'm going to place it about there, just at the back of the home. If I need to, I can move it forward a little bit. And again, that area light, probably by default, is, you know, they all tend to be very, very strong. Let's drop the intensity down quite a bit. Might be easier to just type in a value here, and I'm going to do 100. Is that realistically accurate? Not necessarily, no. But again, with the camera pulled back, The question is, how will these look? Now, I'm going to do Control P, go back to the path tracer. And you'll notice here on the very, very low preset, the samples are 8. I'm going to drop this down to 4. And the bounces, I'm also going to put down to about 4. That's pretty low, but it'll give you a good idea of how things are looking. And it should be, there we go, a little bit faster. Bearing in mind, this is not a nighttime shot. We're just going to find a sky that we like the look of. This is just to give the impression of a glow or warmth coming from the home, so it looks a little bit more lived in. And I think that will work just fine. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to place one more area light upstairs. Probably the bed is the place that, you know, really we could get the nicest warmth effect coming from. That's going to be this one here. Again, let's put that down to about 70. And I might put a nice little soft, nice little, yeah, a little IES, nice little soft one here, just right there. Select that, and again, put this down to maybe about 50. And we'll make it nice and warm. And that will look, I think, very nice indeed. Now, if we get a little bit of bleeding through, I think that'll be okay. All right, let's now go pick a sky that we like the look of. In order to get the mood we want in this, let's go back to skies. And here's where we're going to have a lot of different choices about how we want this to look. Do we want it to be clear? Do we want it to be cloudy? And really, I'm just going to try a bunch of different skies and see what fits, what tracks, and what looks good. You know, at the end of the day, you're just trying to sell a story, give an idea of a mood or atmosphere. And so we can do that. We can just try different things and see what fits. Oh well, yeah. What I do love about this is just the shadows that we're getting. It's looking really, really, really nice indeed. A little bit too bright for our purposes. So let's just step back here, HDRI environments, skies, and maybe just try something a little bit cloudier maybe and just see what looks good. I don't want this to be excessively dingy or dark. So let's try and find something with a nice bit of contrast. How about this guy here? Low sun overcast. And, you know, we could always, you know, go to media, add new images, and make sure that, you know, we've got different skies in different ones of these images. So for this one, let's try this guy out here. And we'll see, it might take another while. And so we could end up with effectively the same image. The only thing that's different is going to be the overall skylight that you're going to get. If you're coming from Lumion, this is very similar to the real skies. That looks really, really nice. I'm gonna make one more, and you've got quite a lot of options here and a lot of choices in terms of the mood that you're trying to go for. Go back to the cloudy just a little bit and see what works. And I'm going to try, I'm kind of leaning on this. I do like the way this is actually hitting the sort of tundra environment, but we'll try one more. We'll leave maybe image 1 as our working file, the one that we're going to mess with. But where did my little sky go? Let's see what we can do. Yeah, I don't necessarily, let's drag this guy out and just see. Yeah, I think this, all in all, these will look pretty good. Once we have our overall sky, we can look at really kind of adjusting the other settings. I kind of like both of these quite a bit. I'm still going back to image 2 as my preferred one. And I'm just going to move this over to the left just so you guys can see. All right, so on image 2, I'm going to hit the Orky, get our, let's see what the real sky looks like. So definitely a lot darker when we hit the path tracer, probably just a little bit too dark. So what we can do is go back out of that, just hit OR again. do kind of like the light that we're getting in this version. So let's try making some changes and see what we can do. All right, I'm going to go to render. And let's see what we can fix here. All right, everyone. It took me a minute just to find the setting that I was looking for. We noticed when we turn on the path tracer that this shot is effectively a little too dark. Now, this was sort of true of the earlier versions of Twinmotion 2. You generally had to crank really the ambient lighting and the intensity of what was at the time the sky dome, but is now these sort of basically the HDRI environments. So here we are again. For that, we were just sort of under path tracer here. We come back to the environment, and you can see this is where we've got our options. We could tweak the exposure, but I'd prefer not to. Generally speaking, if you can kind of avoid just overly cranking exposure on really anything, you want to avoid that. One exception is D5, the auto exposure. You actually want to turn that off. But for this, we'll come back to these settings in a moment. But with just the HDRI, can we take up the intensity on the sky dome? And if we do that, can we bring back the look and feel that we had in the raster version? So let's go ahead and put this at about 8. And you can see we're getting that haze effect that we had earlier, and I think it's looking pretty nice. One issue is, however, that the sun is really behind the entire, really the build. You can see it right here. That's looking nice, yeah. We are getting the light is probably a little bit too strong on these reflections here. But overall, it's starting to look kind of akin to what I really wanted out of this, which is kind of a very desolate shot. Now, I think that looks pretty good. I may drop the intensity back down here. Put that back down to 5. Now that the sun is coming from another angle, you don't need as much. The intensity doesn't need to be as cranked because you are actually getting more direct light from the brightest part of the HDRI, which is going to be that sun right there. All right, I think that looks pretty good. I think we can go ahead and do a Control S. Very much liking the look of this shot so far. And I'm going to turn off the, there we go, Control S, and we'll save. That looks nice. Now, the other things we can do in here is to go back to the Details tab. Again, I mentioned don't crank the exposure. You don't really kind of want to do that. You want to just go ahead and just leave that back as sort of at the midpoint. You know, I would always assume exposure is kind of like the last resort if your image is too short, like if it's too dark. So maybe just leave that alone. But let's see what else we can do. We can also crank up the sun intensity. Now this will be, what I understand is the brightest pixels on the HDRI are acting as a pseudo sun. So we can go ahead and do that. We can adjust the sun size, which will also adjust the shadows, namely sort of the softness of the shadows, and it'll give you a nice kind of hazy quality. You want to avoid really sharp, hard shadows. So I think that will look quite nice. Moon won't make any difference. And the white balance down here is effectively that. Do you want the image to be warmer or cooler? Pretty simple. I'm gonna put it back to, I'll move it actually a little bit to the blue. It's gotten very orange because of the sun that we're actually using. And then the ambient is just that, just how much ambient light you have in the environment. So I'm gonna turn off the path tracer, and you can see if we kind of crank that, we can see the effect that it actually has. And so somewhere here amongst these settings is that sort of sweet spot for lighting. The intensity of the Sky Dome HDRI, or what was called the Sky Dome HDRI, the sun intensity and the ambient, and then the sun size for those soft shadows. Again, I'm trying to get back that nice hazy quality that we had. Okay. So the only thing that's bothering me is the glass here. And one of the issues might be that if we spin our camera, there just isn't anything really here. There's nothing, you know, there's nothing stopping that sort of pillar of light hitting the glass. And so I think we'll need to add just a little bit of maybe some rocks or some trees back here, and I think they will help break up some of that really strong pronounced light. But if we just go back to our save shot and hit, yeah, it's slowly refining. I quite like it. I'm going to make some more tweaks here, but really we're at that point where it's really just picking and choosing the things that you want in your shot. I'm also going to try and set up a comparable shot here using this sky dome as well. And that way we'll have kind of a nice warmer one and a much kind of cooler shot. And once we do that, we can determine which one we like the best and which one we want to bring into Photoshop. All right, let me make some more tweaks to this and I'll see you in a moment. Okay, everybody, we're at the end stage here. And between the two renders, I think I just prefer this one more. There's just a nice contrast, and I think we'll make that a little darker in Photoshop and maybe lighten up this area. Overall, just of the two shots, I think this is just the one I kind of prefer the most. Just gonna make a few changes here, but other than that, I kind of feel like we're done. I'm gonna go ahead and start wrapping things up here really quickly. Okay, we can get rid of the library. We're done with that. I'm going to move this to the left again. Sorry about this. And I'm going to click on ambience one last time and just go through now the settings for this image right here. So we're happy with the environment. That's all good. We can just minimize all of these. All right. And I'm going to click on the camera. Focal length, actually pretty happy with how this is set up, so I may just leave it, but you can adjust this slider here if you wanted to have something a little bit more zoomed in. I'm not going to go through focal length. I think, you know, a lot of people are kind of comfortable with that already. All right, so leaving it there. Depth of field, I am going to enable it. We may or may not actually use it. We may find that the depth of field is maybe too strong or kind of ruins a lot of the image. I have had extremely mixed results with depth of field in Twinmotion in the past. And so, you know, sometimes you might just be better painting this in Photoshop. It might be a little bit easier. But you can always go in here, pick focus, and just click on, for example, right here. And you can then see, you can adjust these sliders, adjust the aperture as well. I'm going to leave it off because I'd actually rather paint it by hand, but there you go. All right, in terms of camera effects, you do want parallelism on, which is basically it's going to line up. Basically, two-point perspective will straighten the edges of the shot. Vignetting, lens flare, all of that stuff, you're probably better off doing in Photoshop anyway. I'm going to go to render here, and I'm going to make sure it's set to path tracer. And in terms of quality, I'm just going to use the default high. If any of you watched the previous video where we looked at the path tracer settings, weirdly enough, just the high was fine for most things. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Hi everybody, welcome back. I did have a slight crash as I was recording the last clip, and so I've gone ahead and just picked this up the next day. We were talking, however, about some of the camera and render settings. So let's pick it back up there. I'm going to move the little icon out of the way. And more specifically, we're talking about the camera settings. Now, we had just left off saying depth of field to leave that off. And we had moved on to sort of camera effects and the render settings. Now, one thing to note is the anti-aliasing filter. This is on the path tracer. And you can see we've got our path tracer settings right here. I'm not going to go back over those again, but the anti-aliasing filter, so anti-aliasing, if you're not aware, is effectively just a smoothing technique. It's not a new one, it's kind of an old one actually, but it just smooths out the jagged edges that you tend to get in sort of pixel images. Now, one thing to note is in Twinmotion, it can give you a very smooth result if that's what you're going for, but if you don't want that and you actually want a sharper result, let's go ahead and bring this down to 1. Drop it all the way down. So 1 is going to be the lowest setting, and I'm just going to type it in here. and just hit enter. There we go. And that means that the image is going to be as sharp as you can possibly make it. Now, when I looked at the image again this morning, I did make a few changes. I added a few more trees and just sort of moved them around, and I also varied the age of the trees a little bit. And in total now, we have 3 different skies set up. The only thing that's really different about these is just the sky that we're using. Nothing else beyond that. And it's really just mood. Now, one curious thing that I did find, if we go back to camera, well, let's go back to environment really quickly. You'll notice that there's an option for the horizon. Now, yesterday when we were working on this, the horizon was not enabled. But if you turn it on, you can actually pick different, really just horizon line images. Now, those are really great because they do allow you to hide the sort of imaginary infinite horizon line that you get in renders, and you always want to hide that. Nothing ruins a render or says you don't really know what you're doing quite like seeing that horizon line. Curious little quirk here at the moment though is that these are, because this is, you know, a preview release, these are kind of buggy, and so I'm kind of having to turn them on and turn them off in each specific shot, which is kind of odd because it didn't do that yesterday. So there you go. If we go ahead and turn these on and then turn it off, we can refresh. So it just means that I'll be careful when I render each of these 3 images out. So all in all, we've got 3 really nice shots, and this is probably the one that I'm going to stick with, and probably the one that I'm going to render out and bring into Photoshop, just because I like that contrast between sort of the dark sky on the left and the lighter blue on the right. Okay, speaking of renderings, let's go ahead and send this out. We're pretty much done with all of this. And our camera is set up nicely. We've got burst vignette, parallelism is on. And so the next thing to do here is maybe if we want to add any effects, I generally won't do this in the rendering software, whether that's Lumion or D5 or Twinmotion or whatever. I do think it's easier and better to just do this in Photoshop, and everything that you render out is for the most part going to go to Photoshop. Every still image is definitely going to go to Photoshop. All right, I am going to refresh this image one more time. And so the last thing then is to go to the image settings for your export. And you can see we've got different options out here for full HD. I'm going to put this to 4K. 4K should be good enough for this right now. You can also click on the details here and do tiled rendering if you were going to do like a 16K export or just really large images and then stitch it together. We're not though, we're just going to do a nice little 4K image. All right, let me go ahead and pause there, and then we'll export this out in a second. All right, everyone. Now that we're good to go, I'm just going to click on image number 3 here again. I will once more turn off this environment tab. This, I mean, we could leave it on for this one. It's not crazy, but I think that's good enough right there. And we can go, just make sure that everything is good. Output size is all good. All right, let's go ahead and hit export. And we're going to hit export, and we're going to export image number 3. I'm going to go to local. Just make sure that we're saving it really on our computer and not to the cloud instead. And image, and I'm going to click add. And we'll do image 3. I'm going to turn off, there we go. Make sure that's good. And I'm going to turn off the real time. I don't really need that. And I can get rid of this one as well. I think this is, there we go. Image 3, that's the one we want. All right, that's it. And I'm going to just move this up and start export. I am set to PNG. So refinement of high. Okay, and then everything else is good. Let's start the export. And just save it to wherever it's going to go. All right, and we'll take a look at this as soon as it's done. Hi everybody, welcome back to the last section. In this part, we are now in Photoshop, and we're going to do our post-production. And so you'll notice, if you look on the bottom left of the corner of the screen, I did go ahead and render these out at 8K. This is still my favorite image of all 3. The others look nice, but there's just something about the lighting in this that really just appeals to me. I think it just looks Good. All right, we will work on it in 8K and then scale it down, and we may end up putting some borders on the bottom or on the sides too. And I don't have any sort of post-production planned. I have no sort of idea what I necessarily want to do here. I'm just gonna right-click and see what happens. So I'll duplicate this layer. There we go. I'm gonna add a quick levels adjustment just to really just kind of ask Photoshop to look at the image and analyze it. All right, looks good. Up to filter, and we'll do camera raw. You can see it's going to take a little bit of time to load, but you also get a really good idea of how the image looks in the histogram over here. All right, I'm going to run through just some of my favorite of these. Are basically Lightroom presets, if you will, loaded up into Photoshop. Cozy is looking pretty nice right now. And I'm just going to find something that I kind of like the look of, maybe try and blend between a couple of different versions and just see kind of what works. See what color scheme we kind of want to sort of, you know, add to the image. I'm going to add Cozy, and I'm going to drop this down just a little bit here. All right, I'm going to duplicate background 1 as well. That'd be layer 1, bring it to the top of the stack, and again, go filter, camera raw, and just see if there's again another look that we can blend between. And I'll try and hopefully link out to these presets. I tried doing it previously before, but the store on Etsy, oddly enough, of all places, had closed. So I kind of lost the ability to link out to them. Either way, though, these will work just fine. I think there we go. Drop that to about 50. All right. So now we've got 2 different layers here, both with different effects on. And I kind of like doing this. You can get a really nice sort of blend between these 2 things just by dropping down the strength here on the layers. And as such, you can kind of just mix and match a little bit the effects that you want. I'm going to duplicate our very low background here, and I'm going to just call this BKG. Just type that in, BKG. And overall, pretty happy with the look that we've got so far. I'm going to, let me just strengthen these again. I just want to see how this top one looks. All right, select these, merge layers, right click, and not that, we'll duplicate them instead. And watch while my Photoshop crashes. All right, and we're back. So right click and merge these layers. I'm going to duplicate them one more time. And I'm going to go up to filter. I'll do camera raw again. And now we'll actually get into sort of the nitty gritty of just tweaking the color values a little bit. I think a lot of the post-production here is going to be done with the burn and dodge tools as well. All right, I'm not going to mess with this too much. Take up the highlights, darken the shadows a wee bit, and we can adjust the brights and the whites and the blacks here, and just I want to make that a little bit more dramatic. Not too bad. Do add a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, and we can mess with the dehaze value to kind of blow out that image a little bit. Take the vibrance up and drop the saturation. You can kind of see saturation is, think of vibrance as kind of a smarter version of saturation. So we take that up and then overall drop the saturation down. And that'll strip out some of that sort of CGI, almost painterly look, and bring back a little bit more realism. Okay, go back to the curves, just see where things are. Overall, pretty good, pretty happy. Let's lift up that S-curve just a little bit. Yeah, all right, I think that looks good. Let's do the color grading next. I'm sorry, color mixer. And I'm going to add some of these greens and blues back in just a little bit, just darken these. You can see if we zoom in, there we go. You can see by grabbing the green saturation slider, you're going to make these trees just a little bit more saturated. Luminance will like lighten or darken them. So we actually might want to take that down. Yeah, that looks good. I'll bring back a little bit of the oranges. we're going to bring back some of the, yeah, bring back that orange just a little bit. And strengthen the reds. And lastly, we'll work on the blues here. I don't want to overly do this. Just a little dash will work. And there we go. Just sort of blue up the sky. All right, looks good. Click OK. So you can see, here's our, if we toggle these on, there's the original. And there's the one we've made changes to on the very top, which I think looks pretty good. Right click, duplicate this again. There we go, duplicate layer, and I'm going to go over to the burn and dodge tools here, and I'm going to grab the burn tool, put on a pretty soft, I'm going to take up the exposure, and what I'm kind of going to try and do is let's get in some mid-tones and make sure we're on, yep, burn. I just want to darken this a little bit over here. Yeah, it is working. It's very, very slow. This image is probably a little bit too large. You know, working with 8K right now, it's probably a little bit too large. And then what I'm going to do is switch to the dodge tool, and I am going to pick out the highlights, make this brush a little bit bigger, and just try and blow out a little bit of that if we can. Probably a little too strong. Grab my paintbrush and just change, add a new layer, and we're going to make it a soft, fluffy paintbrush. Soft round will work fine. Scale that back up, and I'm going to change the blend mode here to, let's just do a little bit of a screen. You can kind of see the effect that has. Yeah, that works really nicely. We've got a nice transition from sort of the orange to the blues. Right, let's merge that back down, and I'm going to just wrap this up pretty quickly. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on post-production for this. I'm going to scale the image down by going image, image size, and I'm going to put the resolution to 150, but change the percent to, so let's put that to, if we put it to 100, we're back. So let's put it to 50. And that should give us a 4K image with Photoshop figuring out how to keep all those lovely details in. And if we zoom in again, there we go. Now things are going to be a little bit more responsive. We get all the nice kind of range going on, but everything should be a little bit more responsive. Right click, duplicate this layer, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, that's a little strong, but we can add a paintbrush and add a mask on the bottom right. Scale up your brush, and we're just going to paint visibility back in. Okay. Just undo that. Yep, we're on our paintbrush. For some reason, it's viewing the mask, which is not what I actually want. Let me figure out how to fix that. All right, sorry about that. I had the image set to display quick mask, so I'm just going to brush out all that blur. I know we just put it on there, but let's just brush it out completely. And we're going to drop the opacity of our brush down to about 60%, and we're going to paint back in just a little dash of that blur. Just a little bit around the edges. And ever so softly. Now I know this is still looking very, very strong around the edges, but just ever so softly. And what we'll do then is scale our brush down, just go into the nooks and crannies here in the back. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because what we will end up doing is dropping the opacity of this mask. So you can just see it's a slight, very slight blur. That's all. Little dash, that'll work. Okay, and I'm going to merge this down. I think it's a good point to go ahead and just merge all of these guys down. Duplicate layer one more time. I'm going to do one more other. Go back up to camera raw really quickly. And I'll do one more just sort of filter pass, just see how things look. I'll go back to the cozy one that we liked, and again, just try and get some of that, kind of that nice, kind of that orange glow back a little bit. Click OK. And again, you can kind of see the difference from our original here to the tweaked one. And the last thing to do is, not delete, we'll duplicate that one more time. And we're going to go to, actually we'll duplicate it 2 more times. And we'll go filter, other high pass, put that at 1%, change the blend mode to overlay. Right click, merge it down, and then go filter, lens correction, custom, add a little dash of distortion in and just fix the cyan magenta fringe. And I think that'll be good enough. All right, with that being said, last thing we can do is go filter, noise, and actually just add a little dash of noise, not a huge amount. Put this to 2 maybe. And click enter, and there we go. We could always maybe add in, you know, if you wanted to add in maybe some rectangles like this, or just to act as a framing device on the back or on the sides. This could work too. Just brush these in. And because that's on its own layer, Control C, Control V, and move this over to the right here. Okay, and merge down. Okay, looking nice. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave that there for now. Let me just stop recording, and I'll see you guys momentarily. All right, everybody, with that finished, we are done with this Build This With Me tutorial. Hopefully it's given you a good idea of how the newest version of Twinmotion is going to work and gives you a good idea of the newer interface as well. A couple of things I have noticed about it. Obviously, it's a preview version, which means your propensity for having a crash or having weird bugs or little quirks is a little bit higher. So that is just something that you have to be mindful of. Would I, use this professionally right now for a project? No, probably not. Just because there was a couple of other little odd behaviors that popped up in between some of the video clips that you've seen. And my concern would be that one of them would be some sort of catastrophic bug or failure. So no, I probably wouldn't use it for production. Is the new interface much better? Yes, absolutely. It's way more logical, way easier to use, more accessible, and I'm going to say a lot more responsive. It's sort of weird, but you don't realize how much time you lose going into menus to find something like how to load up your height map. Over time, it's a cumulative loss, and it's quite substantial. And so having all these options readily available just speeds things up. I did find the interface much smoother too. It's just better. And the other thing I noticed was the path tracing. Doing the 8K images individually really didn't take a huge amount of time. I think they averaged about 4 minutes for 8K, which is maybe about a minute, maybe a minute and a half longer than D5 doing a comparable 8K render. Obviously, there's a lot of variables and factors there, but overall, this Twinmotion 2023 Preview 2, it's really good. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it there. If you've made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you soon. And we've got another couple of videos coming out this week. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.